That is not my problem. Maybe you heard that phrase in the past, and you often wonder, how can people say, that's not my problem? Aren't we all on the same boat? Don't we all work in the same organization? Isn't every single problem we have, in one way or the other, our problem because we all work on the same project in the same team, or at least in the same company, and want to achieve the best for this organization? Well, when we look into why people gave up, and we have to put it in high quotes, when people say, I give up, there are reasons why people give up, and the reasons are not the ones which we often hear. Because often you hear from the leadership team, people gave up simply because they lack attitude, or they are lazy, or they don't have the skills. In many cases, this is plain wrong. And you see it because sometimes people switch companies, they leave one organization, they go to another organization, and suddenly at that organization they become tremendously successful. That is an unambiguous proof that you wasted talent, gave it to the market. You, by the way, you trained that person, you gave that person experience, and then the person said thank you, and now probably works for a competitor. What are the reasons why people give up? And we looked into a couple of reasons, not only in recent publications, but also we talked to people, did interviews, and asked them, why are you not anymore really engaged with the organization you're now working in? And a couple of points are quite interesting. So we are focusing, of course, because I could now name you 100 different reasons, but we are focusing on the main and most named different aspects. So when people give up, the number one reason is they say that there's a lack of leadership. And of course, that is a quite broad statement. So we asked, what do you mean with a lack of leadership? Reason number one they gave us was there's a historical structure. And when I talk about historically grown structures, it normally means that people very clearly tell you, do not try to change them in any way. Although your website, of course, will say we appreciate all the ideas, we are open for innovation, and of course we embrace change as a positive change on the market. Let's face it, in most organizations, these kind of motivational posters, which normally end up in the elevator when you go to your office where you feel like a cow on the way to the slaughterhouse, these kind of posters normally aren't worth the paper they are printed on. When people say there's historical structure, it means you are unwilling to change it. If you want to change it, that's a very simple rule. Approach people and say, we have a very strict set of rules here. It isn't easy to change them, but we are open for suggestion and then you name them the way how you can approach change, how you can ask for changes, and how you can put in your ideas when it comes to organizations. When you simply say there are historical structures, you can also tell people, look, you're here to do your job, sit down, do the job, and don't talk to anyone. And then you either have someone who will take the job for the CV and leave at the earliest point in time possible, or people will simply resign and say, look, I have to pay my rent, I have to pay my mortgage. At the moment, this is the organization which is physically closest to where I live. It's a short commute there, it's a short commute back, so I'm just going through this. I arrive on time and I leave on time. Do you want these employees? Probably not. Historical structure is basically pointless. Tell people how they can start to engage with positive change. The next aspect people name why they give up is a culture of cliques. A culture of cliques, and this of course now, especially in the UK, will be, and of course in the US as well, will be a topic which some people do not like to hear. Culture of cliques means when people say there's an arbitrary entry ticket to, for example, senior management. So you either went to Oxford, Cambridge, Harvard, Princeton, Yale, you know which organizations I'm talking about. And let's just don't get this wrong. The education you get there is excellent. There is no question about it. The education is excellent. Still, when you see for which pricing these organizations offer their online classes, it obviously is not the education and the knowledge you pay for. You probably pay for the alumni network and the contacts you get on the way when you have the degree. Very important is when you have a culture of cliques, people see that at a very early stage when they apply for a job. People go on different sites on your website, and normally you have something like leadership team or board level. And we recently had an interview with Dr. Gabriele Schambach from about gender and equality. And I just told her about one situation, and she could guess how people looked like by 95% correct. So when you have a culture of cliques, it always means you have a couple of people who come from the same background, same university, and they all normally look the same. Normally, suit and tie, dark suit, dark tie, white shirt, male, straight, married, children. That's it. And when you have that, of course, you can say, oh, we had good experiences hiring these people. And Professor Cunning always criticizes this statement for a very good reason. When you tell someone we made good experiences with that, you are talking about your own decisions. So you made the decision, and after that you say we made good experiences with that. You're basically self-promoting and praising what you have done in the past. It's a bit embarrassing. It's a bit cringe as well. So rethink your approach. A culture of cliques always ends up that certain people get promoted to the level where they suddenly face utter incompetence and then they have to leave. If you're really open-minded, and of course you can say we need a certain level of education. No one's questioning that. No one says you have to give anyone with no education the chance to go on your board level from scratch. That's not the point here. But when you say there are arbitrary categories which prevent that people go on a certain career path, people will either give up, which means they only work to get paid and don't engage with the organization, or people will leave. And I give you an example. When you look on my LinkedIn, you find an organization which was, when I went for self-employment, one of my first big clients, first big mandates, New Horizons Computer Learning Centers. And what they did very well is because I started there as an IT trainer, then became a senior trainer and went up the ladder quite quickly, only due to one reason. They were absolutely transparent about this is what we expect. When you achieve that goal, this is where you're next. They never asked to which uni did you go, what did you do here, what did you do there. No one cared. The whole company culture was only about results. And of course, I don't want to say everything was great because no organization is great left, right, and center. Of course, you could question, is the American way the right way to do it? Should you give people on management position only a self-employed mandate? What do you want to do when people start families? Isn't that a bit insecure? And then, of course, you could talk about paid vacation, which you don't get, etc., etc. That's a completely different topic. I don't want to say that everything was perfect there. But what they really understood is how to attract talent in a franchise system on a global level. And when you go on YouTube, you see that I won a couple of awards there. And I went from junior trainer being absolutely no one to being the training and implementation manager for 15 locations just within a couple of years. Only based on achievements, not based on who knows you, not based on you have to talk with that person, and especially not based on some degree entry ticket which must have a certain name on it. So the culture of cliques has to end, especially for one reason. When you often say, well, we have the generation Y and generation X, and they're not really motivated, they don't apply for jobs, they don't show the right attitude. So first, that they are lazy doesn't hold up to scientific standard. If you can show me any piece of evidence or proof where it says Gen X, Gen Y are lazy, please send it to me. I haven't found anything about that. What people are sick of is when they see from the very beginning that they don't have a chance to thrive and to make a career in that organization. So, for example, when you look at the company Monzo, financial industry, very conservative, of course, which most people will say. And of course, City of London is also very conservative. You have the typical suit and tie kind of culture. When you look what Monzo does and look into their sustainability report, and you look into how many women are there in senior decision-making positions and about the LGBT share, etc., you see that it is possible to have a culture which goes way beyond cliques and focuses on results and skill. And this is why these companies enter a market which is very competitive, and suddenly they are way more successful than you are, and they offer exactly the same service, just without everything that is really annoying. Let's face it, when someone today said, oh, I'm going to open a company and I offer current accounts and loans and I make a bit of money with people lending money from getting a loan from me, most people will say that is very competitive. Big banks are already on there. That's correct. And still, someone broke into that market, and as soon as they have the next round of finance, the next round of venture capital, people are throwing money at them left, right, and center because they see that this is a brand they want to work for. So the culture of cliques has to end. Here's the problem. The only ones who can end it are the ones who sit there right now. Because what a culture of cliques often does, they often refer to what we call arbitrary decisions. Arbitrary decisions are decisions you cannot justify by anything. And I give you an example what happened to me. I was a football referee. For our American listeners, soccer. I'm not talking about American football. when you see pictures of me being very young, I was like a stick. There was no chance that I could play American football. I would probably be in hospital after every single game. I was a football referee, and we had a scoring system which went from 0 points to 50, and we had to score 45 points per game, which was a quite complex evaluation system. We had people standing outside watching how we did as a referee and then giving us scores, a couple of games per season, and we had to score 45 or more to be promoted to the next league. So 45 out of 50, just that you know where the expectation of quality is. And there was one situation where I was promoted. I was in the selection of the Northern German referees, which was already quite a nice success. And I went from the entry level to a more senior level by an average of 45.3 points. So I went up one league. I had 45.6 points. So I had 45.6 points, went up one league. A colleague who had 0.3 points in average less was promoted by 2 leagues. And of course, because I liked him, I didn't have a problem with him being promoted, but I just wondered how can that happen. So I asked the decision makers, why is someone who has a lower score being promoted 2 leagues and I am promoted 1 league? And the answer was, that's internal, it's confidential, it's none of your business. We're now celebrating, you were promoted, next season you have the chance to be promoted again, everything's great. So when we see how this decision is communicated, it is clearly an arbitrary decision in the first place. Because when you cannot justify your decision, then of course people will have a go against you. And of course, now people will ask, well, how can I make decisions without making other people angry? Long story short, you can't. When you have a career ladder, and the career ladder is like a pyramid, to the top it becomes quite narrow. When you decide in favor of someone, normally the other person is not very keen on having a beer with you next day. It's just that people are not very happy about the decision. And when you can't defend the position, it was an arbitrary decision, and you have to get rid of decisions which are arbitrary. Make them as measurable as possible, and you have to justify them as soon as someone questions them. So as soon as you tell people they have a lack of attitude, the lack of attitude often comes from people gave up and don't volunteer anymore because they simply see it's pointless, because the system you have in place is driven by arbitrary single moments where you either were in the right place or the wrong place, and everything in your career just goes from there. It is very important that when you, of course, one thing, of course, may now arise. People might say, okay, let's say we have an organization and there are always bad apples in the basket, aren't there? True. There are always bad apples in the basket. Especially this metaphor is at the moment used for the case of George Floyd and the police. Of course, not all policemen are great, but that's not the point. Let's face one situation. I sit together with you and you are selling goods. Let's say you're producing a metal piece. Whatever the metal piece is, you sell it to the market. And the machine you have produces 2% of bad pieces which you have to throw away because no one would buy them. And now you ask me as a consultant, what can we do to have more profitability and more efficiency? I'm German. We are obsessed with efficiency. It's what we do from birth. So when we talk about efficiency and more profitability and more productivity, I could now with that machine tell you, well, you could do more sales and then you sell more pieces or the profit might go up. Or you could put more money in marketing, which makes your product look better, and then people will think it is better than it actually is. Or you can simply try to tell clients 2% of what we deliver to you might not be great, but that's just how it is. And of course, if I would suggest that to you, you would ask me if I am still of a sane mind, and rightly so. The first thing you do when something goes wrong is you look, what is the reason why it goes wrong? And the reason for the 2% of bad pieces is that the machine obviously isn't adjusted very well and you need optimization when it comes to producing that metal piece I'm talking about. So you go from 2% of bad pieces to 1.5 to 1% to 0.5 to 0. Whatever lower score you can have. And this is what you have to look at. When we now talk about how can we become better, you also have to be very careful how to communicate that. We just recently had a talk given by Joe Biden, and in the presidential election, Biden versus Trump, you very clearly find me on the Biden side, although many would assume as an entrepreneur and self-employed person I would be rather conservative. Politically I am, but I do not follow people who, let's just say Biden versus Trump. It is blindingly obvious when you follow the news why I am on the side of Biden. And Joe Biden said during a public speech, he said, when policemen aim at a certain person, we should rather think they probably shouldn't aim at the heart, they should aim at the leg of a person. And of course it became dead silence in the room because people thought, shouldn't that be the standard? Isn't that just common sense? So when you now listen to this podcast, and of course we can sit together, have a chat, we of course offer consulting, training, speaking about this, and of course we can work together there, but it is not something you can do within a 90-minute session and then you just say something and the world is going to change, or send an email to anyone, the usual board level email to anyone, which by the way people hate. It's always the wrong choice to do that. When you communicate it, you have to think through very carefully. What do you communicate? How do you communicate it? And what are the consequences from that? Because people will follow up on it. And from all the criticism which I put here, people will now think, what can I do better? So 3 steps which you can put in place, which makes your organization and your leadership a better one. Step 1, volunteer. Ask people to volunteer, but then accept that they volunteer. You cannot say someone volunteers. They are qualified by their practical skills. I'll just give you an example. A friend of mine works for a very well-known fashion brand, became a leader in one of their major flagship stores in their department, then applied for a leadership position in the headquarters in London, which he clearly is qualified for. He got all the referrals he needed, and then corporate from the United States said, sorry, you can't apply there because you didn't go to uni. So you don't have a bachelor's degree. After more than 10 years of experience, suddenly they say, oh, you don't have that entry ticket, so you can't go to the next step on the career ladder. What happens? He applied somewhere else and now works for the major corporate headquarters of a massive competitor, implements all his ideas there, and they work tremendously well. So when people volunteer, of course, they have to be qualified, but they have to be qualified when it comes to the job they have to do, not with a piece of paper. Second is transparency. When we talk about transparency and you make a decision, some people might question that decision, and you have to tell them why you made the decision. People will very quickly spot when you did someone a favor or you offered someone a shortcut who wasn't worth it only due to maybe a personal connection, maybe your personal network, or maybe only because you think as the leader on the next higher level, you might have an advantage from that, but the business might have not. So transparency means you can defend and justify your decision. And step number 3, offer talent and career path. And these talent and career path based on step 1, volunteering, and step 2, transparency. So the third step is made of the first 2. Very important here, do not use the career path to make people all look the same. Often in organizations I see that people go through a certain career path, and the career path means you all become streamlined, look the same, act the same, do the same, and you all basically become the same kind of clone warrior, and you lose every bit of personality. First, personal branding becomes more and more important, so people like the personality of different people in your organization. When you streamline them all to the same person, people will work together with you way less than they did before. Of course, it's a bit more challenging to lead different people, but that's what makes a good leader. He or she is able to do that. So after volunteering and transparency, show talent path, and the main goal here and also the main motto is that you also have to be careful. Integration wins over assimilation. The goal is not to make them all look the same. The goal is to have different personalities and people to integrate them in your organization. Because as you see on the market, obviously, more diverse organizations are more successful. Look into major brands and you will see proof and evidence. I now wish you all the best when implementing this in your organization. Of course, we can stay in touch. You see all my contact data in the show notes of this podcast. And for today, I can only say thank you very much for your time.